Hey!
Hey Superman, what's happening DC Gowan viewers? It's me, the DC Gowan 1, and welcome to the video. I originally wasn't even planning on doing a review of Supergirl, but after deciding on a whim to see the movie while I was traveling through Europe this summer, I actually ended up having a lot of things to say about it. Overall, I thought Supergirl was good. Not great, but good. I didn't get the same level of enjoyment from Supergirl that I got from seeing Superman, and I'm not really sure why. When I walked out of the theater after watching Superman, I already knew that I would be seeing it again later that week, and I was already looking forward to going back and watching it a second time. I didn't get that with Supergirl. When I walked out of the theater after seeing Supergirl, I thought to myself, that was pretty good, but I had no immediate desire to see it again. And while I wouldn't be opposed to watching it again, I don't think I would go out of my way to see it again, or see it again right away. Of course, we can't talk about this Supergirl movie without mentioning its poor box office performance, which has dominated most of the media coverage and talk around the film. Supergirl cost about $170 million to make, and then had an additional $120 million put into the marketing, meaning that the film would have to make over $300 million just to break even. As of time of writing, Supergirl has just barely crossed 124 million worldwide, and will seemingly fail to break 130 million, performing worse at the box office than 2022's Morbius, and is currently more comparable to Madam Web. This would mean that Supergirl is set to become the biggest flop in DC history, breaking the record of $82 million set by 2004's Catwoman, which when adjusted for inflation is actually closer to $149 million, a number that the Supergirl movie could only hope to make. A lot of people are saying that Supergirl's poor box office performance is due to the mixed reviews and negative attention around the movie, but I don't think that's it. This is the type of box office performance that you only get from lack of interest and people not even going to see it in the first place. When I saw Supergirl, the theater was only at about 25 to 30% capacity. I didn't think much about it in the moment because it was a rainy afternoon in a theater I'd never been to before in another country, so I had no frame of reference for how full screenings at that theater usually are. I should have known something wasn't right since it had just been released the day before, and now that I'm seeing the numbers, it now makes sense. But like I said, I don't think this lack of interest is the fault of the movie itself, but instead comes down to two other factors. For one, the marketing for this movie didn't do it any favors, only releasing a couple trailers and then just a lot of product tie-ins. I don't even remember there being a press tour or the actors doing the standard media circuit, just a couple red carpet events that don't do much to generate hyper-intrigue. The other factor is that the film just got unlucky in being released in the middle of multiple truly historic cinematic events. Supergirl was released 1 week after Toy Story 5, which set a franchise record with a $160 million domestic opening and is set to break the $1 billion mark and become the highest grossing film in the series. Supergirl also followed the surprise $400 million mega hit Obsession, which came out a month earlier, which not only outperformed another huge franchise in Star Wars, but has also become one of the most financially successful horror films of all time and the highest grossing original horror film of the 21st century. It also didn't help that Supergirl came out only a month before Spider-Man Brand New Day is set to release, with Avengers Doomsday coming out at the end of the year, easily the two most anticipated movies of the year, and what are predicted to be two of the most successful superhero movies of all time. And with most people only seeing a few movies in the theater a year, I think Supergirl just couldn't compete with this year's other releases. But let's talk about the movie itself. I really liked Millie Alcock as Supergirl, and her performance carries a lot of the film. She does a great job of portraying the pain and emotional baggage of the character, and you feel for her throughout the whole movie. The scene where she flies into space to let out all of her anger and emotion in one big scream, only for it to be completely silent, was beautifully done, and feels like a moment taken directly out of a comic book. While some of the comedy in the movie could be hit or miss, Alcock's performance made a lot of the humor surrounding Supergirl's personality and general disregard for everything around her work, without losing grasp of why she's the way she is. It's not immature carelessness, it's a coping mechanism that she uses to deal with her trauma. It's a tricky balancing act of portraying the character of Supergirl as a cocky, lazy party animal for the first part of the movie, while still keeping her likable enough so that when she finally does open up, we as the audience feel sympathetic towards her, because the audience could very easily turn on the character before the movie gets to that point. But I think Alcock did a great job of not going too far into the arrogant and aloof persona that Supergirl puts up, so that when the facade finally drops and we see the scared and broken person that she really is, it still feels like the same character, and like the pain was always there since the beginning, and was just being covered up. Which puts her reckless and self-destructive nature in a more tragic light. In addition to being both funny and tragic, she also pulled off making Supergirl intimidating. which I think comes down to knowing that Kara has nothing to lose and doesn't have the same moral center that Superman has, which makes her more threatening as you know she is willing to cross that line if she feels it's necessary, and is something that I wish the movie leaned into more. Eve Ridley did a good job at playing Ruthie, but unfortunately fell into the archetype of the naive sidekick/ally whose pride and overconfidence in their abilities keeps getting them in trouble, and repeatedly pulls the main character into bad situations that they otherwise wouldn't have gotten involved in. It's a very difficult type of character to play as they can very easily become annoying as they continue to create problems or make the situation worse, even if they do have good intentions or even understandable motivations, and they usually end up becoming more of a plot device than a character, whose only purpose is to move the story forward by creating another challenge for the hero to overcome. But I think Ridley did as good of a job as she could have given the type of character she was playing. And as far as these types of characters go, Ruthie's not that bad, and you really do want her to succeed and avenge her family. I didn't care much for the villain Krem, and I think a lot of that is due to how he's presented. He just looks like your standard creepy sci-fi villain, so you expect him to do your standard creepy bad guy things, and that's exactly what you get, and not much more. And to be fair, you don't always have to have a complex or sympathetic villain. Sometimes you just need a monster for your hero to slay at the end of the story. But if you're going to go that direction, you have to go all in with it, and it felt like they couldn't make up their mind with Krem. So he comes across as this cartoonishly evil villain who knows that he's evil and enjoys doing evil things, but in a campy way, which doesn't mix well with the rest of the movie. I think he would have been a far more effective villain if they had kept his design as the good-looking muscular guy from the comics, as it would have made the things he and the other brigands do in the movie even more disturbing, and probably would have made him out to be an even creepier villain than just making him look and act creepy did. Having a character who looks like they'd be a good guy and someone that you would trust as a human trafficker is way more unsettling than eating bugs or having his face covered in studs, and also creates the opportunity for interesting story and character dynamics. Instead, it feels like the only direction given for the character was to be creepy and intimidating, which ends up being very one-dimensional. And then you have Jason Momoa as Lobo. Man, he was just born to play that role. Every time he's on screen, he's a joy to watch, especially when he's allowed to cut loose and just have fun, like in the fight scenes. I just wish we got to see more of him, and I really wish we got to see him interact more with Supergirl. Lobo and Supergirl literally only have 2 scenes together where they actually talk to each other, and then basically don't interact for the entire second half of the movie. If you told me that Momoa and Alcock only had 1 day where they were actually on set together, I would believe you, because even when they are in scenes together, they're rarely both on screen at the same time. Lobo interacts with Ruthie way more than he does with Supergirl, and the two actually form a connection and have a decent chemistry between them. Lobo just felt very tacked on, which was really disappointing and seriously underwhelming given how much he was advertised in the marketing, even more than Krem was. You can tell that Momoa really enjoys playing Lobo, and that enthusiasm comes through in the performance, but his involvement in the film just feels unnecessary. You could have cut Lobo from the film completely and it would have had no impact on the plot. On the other hand, a character that I was surprised to see so much of in this movie was Superman.
Hi there.
I went into this movie expecting Superman to only be in a couple scenes. Maybe one scene at the beginning where he's talking to Supergirl through a video call, and then a flashback scene of when Superman and Supergirl first met. I wasn't expecting him to be a constant presence throughout the film. He actually has more of an impact on the plot than Lobo does. Superman's purpose in the movie is to show how the two characters' different upbringings affected them in their personalities, and it reinforces the idea that who Superman is as a person has more to do with being raised by the Kents than his Kryptonian heritage. I also like that despite being the more well-adjusted of the two, which Supergirl even envies him for, the movie makes sure to show that Superman doesn't have everything figured out either, highlighting the human side of Superman, which has become the defining characteristic of Cornsweet's portrayal of the Man of Steel. We also got to see a lot more of Krypton and the other Kryptonians than I expected. We spend a lot of time in Argo City with Kara and her parents as the remaining Kryptonians slowly die around them. It's interesting because outside of Superman's parents and General Zod, we usually don't get to know any other Kryptonians, or see what Kryptonian civilization is like outside of those final days of Krypton. These scenes do double down on the idea that Kal-El was sent to Earth to be a conqueror, which I still have mixed feelings about. But the movie puts an interesting twist on it by showing the dichotomy of Superman and Supergirl's missions and the people they turned out to be. Superman was sent to Earth to be a conqueror, and ended up becoming a servant of the people. Supergirl was sent to Earth with her only instruction being to be good, and ends up being more of a troublemaker who rejects the idea of helping people. They both went against what they were supposed to be, and chose to live their lives how they wanted, and the film shows both the positive and negative sides of that. I thought that was a clever parallel and an interesting theme for the movie. The movie itself is visually stunning. The cinematography, the lighting, and the coloring are beautiful and give the film a much different aesthetic than what you normally see in a superhero movie. That close-up shot of Supergirl's costume being illuminated by the rising yellow sun has been ingrained in my mind since I saw the movie, and might be my favorite shot of the film. I really like how the film mostly relied on practical costumes and prosthetics for a lot of the aliens, which contributed to the movie's overall visual style. It didn't do the CGI any favors, however, and instead made the shoddy green screen shots stand out even more. I don't know if it was a budget restraint or a time restraint, or just bad filmmaking, but there were a handful of shots, especially at the end of the film, where the environment just looked fake, which is odd because the film seemed to mostly use practical environments and sets, but in those last few scenes the backgrounds just looked flat, making the shots appear as if they were unfinished, which takes you out of the drama of the moment. I also had an issue with a lot of the fight scenes. I don't know if it was the director, a producer, or the fight choreographer, but it was clear that someone behind the scenes was trying to recreate the magic of the Mr. Terrific fight scene from Superman, and used the same style of fight sequence multiple times in the movie. Almost every big fight scene in Supergirl contains a slow-motion one-take where the camera orbits around a central point as the action happens around it, meaning that we don't even see most of it. Doing it once was bad enough because it's immediately going to come across as rehashing something that people thought was cool from the previous film, but doing it multiple times in the same movie makes it feel repetitive and takes away the uniqueness factor that made it fun in the first place. If they only did it once and saved it for the final big fight scene, it wouldn't have been so bad, and would have put the audience in the perspective of Ruthie as she struggles to keep up with all the chaos happening around her, and could have been a powerful moment. Instead, you're just left thinking, we've seen this before. We've seen this before in this movie. There's also the climax of the movie and the conclusion of Krem's story. When I saw the movie, I figured that this would be the big debate among the audience concerning the plot and themes of the movie, and I could immediately see both sides of the argument. On the one hand, you could argue that it was incredibly hypocritical that Supergirl gives this big speech to Ruthie that killing Krem isn't going to change or fix anything, and will only bring her down to his level and ruin her life even more, only to turn around and kill Krem herself. Not only does it go against what she just said to Ruthie, but she also robs Ruthie of getting her revenge on the man that killed her family that she just spent the whole movie fighting for, just so that Kara could do it herself. On the other hand, you could argue that Supergirl killing Krem herself is following through on what she said to Ruthie, with Supergirl taking on the burden of killing Krem to spare Ruthie of the effects that killing him would have on her, as there's nothing that killing Krem would do to Supergirl that hasn't already been done, as she believes she's already broken, and so took it upon herself so that Ruthie doesn't end up like her. This is what I got from the scene, and I think that was the idea the movie was trying to get across. There will probably still be the question of if it was right of Supergirl to let Ruthie think she had made the choice to spare Krem, when in reality that choice was taken away from her by Supergirl going through with it, but I think that's an interesting question to leave for the audience to think about and discuss. And it is fitting that Supergirl uses the sword made by Ruthie's father to kill Krem. It does give some level of retribution for Ruthie's family. Like I said before, I thought Supergirl was good. I just think it could have done more with what it was given. The movie had a lot of interesting themes and ideas around identity, purpose, and how we perceive ourselves that I wish it would have done more with. Characters like Krem and Lobo felt really underdeveloped, and in terms of the latter, felt like an afterthought that was thrown in at the last minute. According to director Craig Gillespie, one of the original cuts of Supergirl was close to 3 hours long and would have had a hard R rating, which was apparently heavily cut down by James Gunn early on. According to other sources, there were 2 competing cuts of the film leading up to the release, one from Gillespie and one from DC Studios, with the shorter DC Studios cut beating out Gillespie's 2-hour cut with test audiences and being the one shown in theaters. We know that Gillespie's 2-hour cut featured more Krem and some more elements from the original comic, but we don't have a lot of information on what was in that original R-rated 3-hour cut. Knowing that there was this repeated studio interference helps to explain why the film seemingly doesn't have a clear, singular artistic voice and instead felt like one director trying to mimic another director's style. It would be interesting to see what was left out from the other cuts, as this is a movie that could have greatly benefited from having more time to develop the ideas and characters that it had. But for what it is, the film we got isn't that bad. It's a fun popcorn movie that you can watch once and have a good time with, and while it may not go on to be fondly remembered or leave a big impact, I think it's still worth seeing if you're a superhero fan, or if you just want to have a fun afternoon and go see a movie. And in terms of setting up the future of the DCU, It did what it needed to do from a world-building perspective. It introduced a character that you know will be coming back in future projects, so now the next time they appear, they will already be established and able to easily be integrated into the larger narrative, without having to establish who they are as a character at the same time, an issue that Batman vs. Superman and James Gunn's Superman both ran into. While I'm sure DC wanted Supergirl to be a massive hit, it did its job in providing another piece of the puzzle. Maybe the film took its own message to heart. It didn't need to be great, but just be good. But let me know what you think. Leave your thoughts in the comments below about what you thought of Supergirl, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos.